God, whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. It's indeed a great pleasure to have been provided with the opportunity to speak before a group of educated, intelligent people. Forget about the number. It's important that we interact and we talk about a very important problem that we are confronting, frankly. Um, I'll try to be brief because I would want more time to be spared for discussion. So, but anyway, I look at it here. Why has religious extremism become a problem in Muslim communities, and how might we change it? Um, what is religious extremism? This is my perspective. It's an approach of religious exclusivism which doesn't allow others the right to believe in and practice faith of their choice. There are people who think that what they believe in and what their understanding of religion is the ultimate understanding, and there's no other understanding which should be allowed any space. It is an attitude which causes people to take extreme positions in religious matters. You know, when you're talking about any particular subject on religion, whether it is belief or practice, there's certain views which are understandable, but there are certain others which are a bit very strong and extreme. So that's also what is included in religious extremism. And it is a state of mind which doesn't allow the possibility of that the other view could be correct. So you're so stubborn, firm, inflexible that you say that this is what the truth is and accept it, or you are damned and condemned. So that's the problem that we are facing with some people. Why should we be moderate and tolerant? I mean, some people might ask, is it not that religion in its very nature carries a message which claims to be the ultimate truth? And why should we be tolerant or flexible? What I'm trying to say is that people believe in and practice what they have learned from their elders or what they have been convinced by. You believe in whatever you believe is, and you practice as much as you can what either you've taken from your elders, from your tradition, or what you've been convinced by. That's my reason too for following our beliefs. Why should we blame others for what they're doing then? I mean, if the other people have likewise gone through a process wherein they have understood a point of view, or they have accepted it because of the influence of the tradition, and they're following it, that's exactly what others are doing. That's exactly what those people are doing who are turning out to be extremists. What they should do is to imagine, to empathize with others and to tell themselves that, look here, it's the same process that they've gone through. The only difference is that probably they were exposed to and confronted with a different point of view. Had you been in their position, probably you would have done exactly the same. So at times it really seems very strange, ridiculous, that I, as a religious person, have a certain point of view because I know that I was born at a certain place with certain parents, and I was brought up in a community, and I was exposed to certain views, and therefore I was influenced by those views. Likewise is the case of somebody who has completely different views from mine. So why should that other person not be allowed the liberty, the freedom, the space to also believe in and practice the way I am believing in and practicing my faith? So, in my opinion, to not be extremist, to be moderate, and to be tolerant is natural, is understandable, is the only right way. However, that is not what many religious people agree with. My claim is that the teachings of Islam, they encourage us to be tolerant, to not be extremists, to be respectful to all others. the word Islam itself means peace, quite apart from submission. Our greetings are Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. That is, don't have any fears from us. You should feel comfortable in our company. The Quran tells us time and again that all humans are one family. They have come from one couple, Adam and Eve. And therefore all men and women are brothers and sisters in human race. And the Quran teaches us that we repel evil with what is good. If somebody is being bad, evil to us, the Quran tells us that our response should be Itfa billati hi ahsan. We should respond in a manner which is good, polite, is different. Then the Quran tells us that we should not use abusive language against the gods of others, even if we do not agree with their understanding, lest they should use similar language for your God, the one you believe in and you worship. So the idea is again that we've got to be tolerant, we've got to be accommodating and not extreme in our attitude. We've been asked to invite others towards our faith intelligently, wisely, politely. And the Quran says, وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا. When you speak, be fair, be just in your speech. And we know that the Quran tells us that whoever kills a human, any human being, it is as huge big a crime as if you killed the entire humanity. Likewise, if you are instrumental in saving the life of one individual, it is as big a virtue as if you have saved the entire mankind. Now, with all these set of teachings, one wonders as to why some people who believe in all these statements coming from God, and yet they are extremists, they are harsh, very aggressive in their approach and attitude towards others. Why? What I'm trying to say is that there are essentially two reasons. There are certain religious arguments. There's some arguments that I've presented which are trying to prove that my religion wants us to be peaceful, to be moderate, to be respectful, and to be accommodating. But there are many others who have become extremists because they think that the reality is quite the otherwise. So what they say is that the Quran tells us that we should be firm against kafirs and munafiqs. Kafir is a word which is quite often translated as non-Muslims. So somebody who is different in his faith from your faith is a kafir, and the Quran says be firm against them and also against the munafiqs, the hypocrites. Kafirs are worse than beasts is a statement of the Quran. So you imagine that if you translate this word kafir as non-Muslim, then the rest of the task is already done. You don't have anything else to do but read the Quran and become very strong against non-Muslims. Then there is an understanding, strong understanding amongst many committed Muslims that we cannot make non-Muslims our friends. We'll sometimes treat them well. We'll talk to them with a smile, but it's going to be only cosmetic. No genuine feelings of friendship can be had for people who don't share our faith. This is what the understanding is. Likewise, it is mentioned, all these three statements are coming from the Quran. There is fourth understanding which says that if somebody observes an evil, the highest level of virtue is that he should change it with his might, with his hands. If that is not possible, then you should use your tongue. And if that too is not possible, then you should at least condemn it in your heart. And this is the weakest part of faith. Now, with these kind of arguments, and many more, I've just given you a sample of a few arguments from the text, which are employed by some Muslims to prove and to be convinced that they need to be strong, firm, harsh, rigid, inflexible, aggressive in their religious stance and their attitude towards others. And you might ask me, why on earth are you having a different view? Well, I'll let you know why. But let me talk to you about another reason, quite apart from these religious arguments which people present, why some Muslims are extremists. And that reason, I call it the reason of environment, the religious environment. You see, many religious people, not just Muslims, Christians and all others, they learn their religion from somewhere. The manner they learn their religion, it has a lot to do with their attitude. So, typically, there is an environment wherein people go and they learn their message, religious message from there. Those who turn extremists, their environment is confined. People who go there, they have similar views. They're talking about the same stuff. In actual fact, in many cases, they look alike. Their appearance is absolutely identical. You cannot identify one from the other. The information provided is one-sided. It's so strongly, effectively, emotionally put across that the people who are there to learn, they take it as the final word, coming from the heavens, from the Almighty. In the environment, questions are not encouraged. In fact, somebody who questions is considered to have a weak faith, is in doubt, and therefore the poor chap is asking questions. The right attitude is that you keep mum, listen to what I'm saying, and accept it as completely and totally correct from God. It is encouraged in this environment that you've got to blindly follow your scholars, which, if somebody has a question as to what it means, is clarified by statements, clarifying statements like these, that by blind following, what we mean is, even if you don't understand what the reason for a particular view is, you've still got to follow it. Why? Because you've got this confidence in your scholar, who's a pious man, who's spent years in his learning, in his research, and he cannot go wrong. So that's another aspect of the environment. And there are social pressures. Well, probably this point should have come right at the beginning. It so happens typically that a person who is not quite as religious is attracted, forced to join a group. And the group has the kind of features that I've mentioned. And the end result is that with this kind of environment and with the kind of arguments that I've already mentioned, the end result is a product called religious extremist. It comes out, and they come out in huge numbers. There might be differences in their own respective views, but the end result of extremism is there to be found in almost all members of these groups. So, how should we face the challenge? And why should we face this challenge? That's the first question from a religious perspective. The first thing that I would say is that the way out of it is religious arguments should be countered with religious arguments. I quite often come across people saying that people turn extremists in religion because they're deprived. Well, it could be true, but not completely. I can tell you about a good number of people who've got no problems in their lives. They're millionaires, billionaires, and they're extremists. So this argument of economic deprivation is good, but not enough. Uh, we need to address all the arguments that are presented from the text, because what an extremist believes is that the understanding that he has is from God, and therefore what he is doing is a duty towards God, and if he's not going to do it, then he's going to be disloyal. Mind you, this statement is coming from somebody who is an ex-extremist. So I can tell you, you've got those emotions, very strong emotions in you, which cause you to feel so very strongly attached to the attitude. Now let me take briefly all these arguments one by one. Being harsh on kafirs and munafiqs. Well, there is a verse in the Quran, well, two verses in two different passages of the Quran. I mentioned one of them. Ya ayyuhan nabi jahidil kuffara wal munafiqin waghluz alayh. O Prophet, you do jihad against the kuffar, kafirs, and munafiqs, hypocrites. Waghluz alayhim, and be strong with them. No politeness is going to be allowed as far as dealing with them is concerned. This verse itself is actually giving an idea that the Prophet, may God mercy be on him, was polite, and therefore he had to be told that you behave differently. Now, obviously, the question is why differently? What I'm going to say is the key to what my presentation is. You see, there is a law mentioned in the Quran. When I say law, what it means is it's a policy of God, which the Quran calls sunnatullah, the way God deals with matters that have got to do with this worldly life. One important law that has been mentioned in the Quran is the law relevant to the messengers, to the Rasul. The Quran informs us that God Almighty has picked a few people, men, to deliver His message to the rest of the mankind. Those men are called Nabi, whose plural is Anbiya. From amongst Anbiya, there is a subset called Rasul, the plural of which is Rusul. About these Rusul, this word I'm translating as messenger, these messengers were sent by the Almighty with a mandate that when they will deliver the message of the Almighty to their nation, and the message would become absolutely clear, not on day one, after a certain duration lapses, it would become unmistakably clear. Those who would not accept it and would oppose it would become criminals in the eyes of God, and they would be punished. In most cases, according to the stories mentioned in the Quran over and over again, in most cases, these nations met with punishment from the Almighty in the form of natural calamities, one natural calamity or the other. However, that's not the only way that the Almighty decided to deal with these criminals. If the followers of the messenger were decent in number, then it would be the military might of the followers that would be employed by the Almighty to inflict His divine punishment on those who opposed the messenger, rejected him, and therefore, after a lapse of a duration, when the final decision of the Almighty came, they became eligible to be killed. That's the key to understanding the verses, which have quite often been used, misused, and taken out of the context. So this verse is actually telling us that when that deadline was coming close, the Almighty asked the Prophet, who was all throughout his prophetic career the most polite person while dealing with others, to not be polite anymore, because these people now are coming on the verge of receiving God's punishment. So that's the context. Those people who quote verses like these, they, I don't know, deliberately or otherwise, they do not quote other verses. Well, in actual fact, many of them say that the other verses, which are talking about politeness, are abrogated. So, the other thing is that kafirs are worse than beasts. But honest to God, if I could do only one service, I would be so delighted to be able to clarify this word kafir. The word kafir, I've mentioned a few verses to prove my point, but obviously I don't have time to go into the details. According to the Quran, means a person who knows the truth from God very clearly and yet rejects and spurns it deliberately, knowingly. That person is a kafir. And the Quran is clear that here that Muslims can also be kafirs. So the word kafir has got nothing to do with a person's religious attachment. It's not something which is actually telling you there are certain people who are Muslims and there are certain others who are not Muslims are kafirs. In fact, whether a person is a Muslim or a kafir, if he or she comes to know about the fact that there is a message of God which he has understood clearly and then say that I don't care, I just don't care. So this particular expression has been used time and again by many extremists, and the end result is that people are then treated in accordance with the understanding as to how those kuffar are to be treated. Friendship with non-Muslims is not allowed. Well, I've quoted the verses. This verse 51 says, do not make the Jews and the Christians your friends. They are friends of each other. The Arabic expression is al-Yahud and al-Nasara. This alif lam preceding a noun in Arabic could mean one of the two things. Either all those who come within the category or a specific particular group. So the verse, don't make the Jews and the Christians your friends, could either mean do not make any Jew or any Christian your friend. Or it could mean don't make these Jews and these Christians your friends. The first understanding is not possible. You know why? Because the Quran allows at least Muslim men to get married to women from the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians. So obviously if you simultaneously understand both verses in the manner some people understand, then what it would mean is that you make a lady your wife, but she certainly cannot be your friend. It's not a bad idea actually. But obviously it's a contradiction. The fact of the matter is that you move on to the next two verses and you would find the context. The Quran is telling us that there were some people from amongst the Jews and from amongst the Nasara who made fun of God's religion. When there used to be a call for prayers, azan, they would make fun of it. The Quran says don't make them your friends. Obviously, if somebody makes fun of my religion, even if he is a so-called Muslim, I cannot make him my friend. But it has got nothing to do with the good Christians and Jews who respect the Muslim faith, even if they disagree. Likewise, in this particular case, kafirs are worse than beasts. If that's the understanding, all non-Muslims are kafirs. Then there is a passage in the Quran which praises, well, not one, but I'm just referring to one, which praises some people of the book lavishly. It's verses 113 to 115 from chapter 3. You read them and you would find that the Almighty is praising them. They're wonderful people. No matter what good they do, it is not going to be allowed to be wasted. So, it's all misunderstanding, misreading of the text. And the hadith that says that you correct evil whenever you see it with your hands, if that is not possible, then do it with your tongue, and if that too is not possible, then condemn it in your heart. Well, the context of the hadith is that if you have authority, if you are given a position wherein you can use your hand, your authority. So the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, in the first 13 years of his prophetic career mission, uh, prayed in the Holy Kaaba 5 times a day, where there were statues that were being worshipped. And he is not known to have even touched one of them. He would not. Obviously, there is no question of any weakness in faith. But later on, when he came back 8 years after migration as a conqueror, he cleansed the Holy Kaaba from all those statues. So the idea is that if you have the authority, then you will use the authority to get rid of what you think is wrong. But if you don't have the authority, you don't have the right to use your strength. You cannot go to the next door neighbor telling him that I don't like the way your wife is dressed. He would, I think, give you a good response for you to remember. So, you mind your own business. If you have an authority, well, you can exercise it. If you don't have if you don't have the authority, then better mind your own business. So what is the way out? The way out is, as far as religious environment is concerned, listen to everyone. That's what the Quran says. The Quran in this particular verse and in some other passages, condemning those who are not listening to others with an open mind. We need to search for the truth. This verse that I've quoted is actually asking the Prophet to tell the non-believers that if they have a book which is even more straight in guidance than the Quran and Torah, then I will follow it. I'll do it. In other words, what the Quran is telling us is that we should always be on the search of truth, looking for it. And there is no reason why we should stubbornly stick to a certain view, even though we don't understand it and we are not convinced about it. So search for the truth is the ultimate reason why you should be attached to a religion, because a religion message coming from God, claiming to be coming from God, is actually asking you to follow the truth. Use your intellect. I can assure you that there is no other book that emphasizes the use of intellect more than the Quran. And sadly, there is no book which is read so many times, so frequently by its followers without understanding it. So the Quran is telling us that the worst kind of beasts in the eyes of God are those who are deaf, dumb. They don't use their intellect. This particular verse, its reference is very easy to remember. Chapter 10, verse 100. The verse is telling us that you get faith as a consequence of using your intellect. So the faith that many people think is to be had through blindly following people is quite the contrary, is to be derived, to be inculcated as a consequence of using one's intellect properly. And the Quran keeps telling us that ask questions, and has many different passages where the Almighty has mentioned the questions of people and have answered them. So it would be a contradiction of its own message if on the one hand the Quran is requiring people not to ask questions, and on the other hand is quoting the questions of people and answering them. And probably the most prominent passages from 30 verse onwards of chapter 2, wherein the Almighty tells us something very interesting. He declared his policy, his plan to create man before angels. And the angels, they did not say, yes, sir. Whatever you say, we agree. They asked some very serious questions. are you going to create those who are going to create mischief on earth and are going to shed the blood of each other? And the Almighty did not say in response to what they said, just shut up. How dare you ask these questions? Quite the contrary, He proceeded to answer, responded to the questions that they had raised, and did something, and it's not the occasion for me to explain how it was done, did something that caused angels to ultimately say, well, we got it now. We understand. What the Almighty said actually was, not going into the details, that you have raised a valid point, but you have looked at only one side of the picture. You've completely missed the other side. And when the angels realized it, they said, well, we've got the point. Now, we understand what you're doing, O God. You always do the right thing. It's only that we missed the point and we didn't understand the full picture. And obviously, as far as social pressures are concerned, we should be always aware of them and not allow those to influence us. Finally, there is a need for genuine communication, which the Quran always emphasizes. We should speak the truth, we should speak it politely, we should put across our point of view, and should also listen to the other view with an open mind. That is exactly what the Quran wants from its followers, that they should have good communication with others. We should avoid suspecting others' intentions, should not believe that those who are different from us are evil. They mean bad for us. That's what the Quran condemns. Likewise, the Quran and Hadith, they would want believers to not be arrogant. And while explaining arrogance, the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, he mentioned two things. Arrogance is comprised of two components. You look down upon others as inferiors is one aspect of arrogance, and the other aspect is that you refuse to acknowledge the truth. So, looking down upon others as inferiors, Muslims or non-Muslims, is arrogance, and the Almighty mentioned that the person who is arrogant would not succeed, would not be allowed to enter the paradise. The Quran urges the believer to invite others intelligently towards the faith, and we should also realize that communicating God's message with unmistakable clarity, itmam hujjat, isn't possible now. What it means is that what was possible at the time of the messengers is not possible anymore. The messengers, when they would come, because of their personality, their character, the message they carried, the circumstances surrounding them, and so many other factors, all put together would contribute, and also the miracles that accompanied them. They would all come together to ensure that the addressees would know most clearly that the message that is being delivered to them is indeed from God. This clarity is not possible anymore. It is not going to be possible until the day of judgment, because the Quran declares that no further prophets can come. Now the message is going to be delivered by ordinary mortals like us, who have weaknesses, who have problems of communication, who may not be able to explain everything clearly, and therefore others have a good reason, justifiable reason to say, well, okay, well explained, but we're not convinced. This, when people who were receiving message from the messengers would do consistently over a period of time, would be declared criminals. The huge blunder that many Muslims have committed is that those verses they have unjustifiably generalized. They were era specific. They certainly cannot be just generalized. And finally, the decision of success in the next life is in God's hands. So it's none of my business to say that this person is going to enter the paradise and the other one is hellbound. It is silly. It is only God's decision and nobody else's. We are here to perform as best as we can, morally, spiritually, intellectually. got to contribute to humanity, contribute to the cause of truth. And we are here to understand God's message and to deliver it properly. Uh, that's the way out. And if that is the way Muslims proceed, they would neither be extremists, nor extremism is ever going to lead to terrorism. They will be polite, they will be intelligently communicating with others, and would be open-minded. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you, Khalid. Thank you so much. Typical clarity, perfect timing, and it leaves us a bit of time now for some questions and discussion. I just wondered if you wanted to say something. I should have probably asked you at the beginning, but just for like maybe a couple of minutes about Al-Mawrid and, you know, what the kind of philosophy and principles of...
Al-Mawrid is an institute which was created with a view to
Then think of questions.
Promoting the understanding of the Quran and the Sunnah in a manner that it is not influenced by any sectarian understanding, that it is understood independently and the understanding is promoted. Obviously, those who understand are humans. They can also make mistakes. Therefore, in Al-Mawrid, what we have resolved is that while we will promote our understanding, we will also remain absolutely open to what others are saying, so that our mistakes, errors in understanding could be removed. This institute practically has been functional for the last 35 years, although it has had its history of sometimes getting into difficulties. But all throughout these years, what we have attempted to do is to have what I might call a revisit to the original sources of Islam, which is the Quran and Sunnah, supported by a footnote explanation of Hadith.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, do we have some questions? Yeah, Michael, yeah.
Thank you very much for your talk, and I appreciated the limitations you're putting on a lot of the Quranic verses that are used with a lot of confidence that maybe is not always warranted confidence by people who are interpreting it. I wonder, though, for those who feel at some risk from Muslim extremism, because there is that sense that in a time of perfectibility these things will come to pass, that may not be so comforting for some people. I think first about, for example, Coptic Christians in Egypt who feel they're in a position, there are people who have authority. For example, when you talk about correcting evil with your hands, there are people with the authority to do that, and they feel now that they are vulnerable because of that. How does this, what you described, satisfy that? And if we can then think forward about people, for example, I'm not saying that we agree with that, but there is a right-wing discourse here in Britain that says, well, when Britain is Islamicized, then we're all going to be vulnerable to these terrible injunctions. So what would you say to that perspective when, for example, people have the authority to do
You
this?
see, those who are in authority, they can use their authority to enforce the understanding of eliminating evil. What it means is that they will proceed in a manner wherein they will make laws, frame laws. Now, the way they will do it is again going to be decided by the Quran. The Quran binds its rulers to decide the matters of running the affairs of the society on the basis of mutual consultation. Now, it's an expression, amruhum shura bainahum. Their matters are decided by their mutual consultation, which can be understood in different times differently. The modality, the mechanism could be different. Like when this verse was revealed, mutual consultation, The system was tribal, and the kind of consultation that could have taken place was employed. And now we have democracy, which enables almost everybody to chip in with her views. There are criticisms on the manner democracy operates. Some of the criticism is valid, but in principle, democracy does exactly the same thing which the Quran is requiring. That the people who are to be governed are the very ones who must decide who their rulers should be and what kind of laws should be framed. So when a law is decided, you in your country as well make sure that it is enforced. My friend was telling me that the other day he went past a red light and he was taken to task. That's what enforcing, the understanding of evil to be snubbed is. That is, you make sure that the law is there in place and that it is followed by everybody.
Thank you for your presentation. It's very useful. I just have a few questions. Number one, in your second slide or third slide, you made the point that many Muslims are convinced of the truth of Islam. And I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate here. Is that a sort of assumption because are Muslims really convinced of the truth of Islam, or is it something that they just learned from their fathers and they continue? Because there's an assumption that they're convinced of the truth of Islam. That's the first thing. The second thing was, do you feel that part of the problem also, and I know you've touched on it briefly, is that people, or we have a crisis in authority and tradition where people aren't going, the prism of authority isn't there perhaps as much as we had it historically, perhaps because of colonialism or democratization of knowledge and so forth. Do you think that's also part of the problem, that the tradition isn't, the Torah, if you like, isn't used as a vehicle through which to understand the text?
You see, as far as the first question is concerned, I do agree that, the expression that I employed of people being convinced was used from their point of view. People, when they're emotionally attached to the extent that they are prepared to lay down their lives, apparently it seems that they're convinced. But I do agree with you that when we use this expression of being convinced, what we really mean is that we have understood what the message is, we know the arguments, we know the counter arguments, we had weighed the pros and cons and everything, and then we are convinced. That's not what most people are doing. I agree with it. In actual fact, that process is being blocked, and that is in itself a huge problem. It's at the very heart of the problem of religious extremism. I'm perfectly convinced that if you allow religious people to be able to talk to everybody, to be able to listen to the other views, howsoever different from theirs, they would still, in many cases, be attached to their own faith, but they would not be extremists anymore. So yes, you're right. I mean, they're not convinced if the expression is used in the right sense of the word. But many people have this understanding about their faith that they are convinced, even though intellectually speaking they are not. Coming to the second question, I think this process of democratization of knowledge, which you call, we can disagree, to me is not a bad idea. We always must respect authority, religious, intellectual authority, because that authority has at its back research of years. However, if I have a perception about a gentleman or a group of people that their understanding and interpretation is correct because they have vast knowledge, deep knowledge of the subject, and they are pious people. And therefore, no matter what they say, I've got to accept it as the ultimate truth. I think that's what the problem is. And the trouble is that, if there are a group of scholars who are like-minded and they're saying one set of things, and there are people who are accepting them, there are many others on the other side of the divide sharing the same faith, the broad understanding of it, but their views are very different. There is no escape from allowing even an individual layperson to use her own intellect in deciding what is the right understanding in religion. I am accountable to God for what I understand and what I do. And therefore, at the end of the day, I must decide which amongst the different contesting views is the right one. So I think this process everybody has to go through. And again, I emphasize that if this process is adopted, then people most certainly cannot be extremists.
Matt, and then Roy.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting to hear this kind of talk in a current scholarly context which scholars are keen to move away from the link between religious extremism and religious content, shifting onto issues of class, as you mentioned, and race specifically. So it's really interesting to hear that kind of talk, so thank you. I just wonder, in your experience, how persuasive is this? You mentioned at the start about how you must use religious arguments to counter religious arguments. I just wondered, in your experience, how persuasive is that? Because what immediately comes to my mind is, I imagine it almost could turn into a slugging match where you just both say quotes at each other, and then it's the person is left to decide from amongst them. Also, in terms of you mentioned about the notion of kafir, and particularly in relation to other people of the book, to Christian Jews, I just wondered whether
I define or explain a kafir as a person who knows the truth from inside and is rejecting it knowingly. What I'm also saying is that if that is the understanding that I've got, then I've got no business whatsoever to declare anybody a kafir. Well, I can say with confidence that Abu Jahl, Abu Lahab, and other people who rejected the messenger when he was there, physically present, they were kafirs. But about others, I have no business whatsoever to say. Not even about non-religious people and atheists. What I would tell myself is that these people who are non-religious, these people who reject the possibility of God, they don't know the understanding that I know. Or even if they know, they're not convinced. Now, if a person is not convinced, there could be one of the two reasons. The person has not been properly informed, or he or she has been properly informed, but is not prepared, is stubborn, inflexible. I don't know which of the two possibilities is relevant to a certain individual, and therefore I cannot declare any person guilty of rejecting the truth knowingly, and therefore declaring him a kafir. There are many people who are very persuasive. Some of them are thankfully not very aggressive. They have not turned militants. But there are others who are not just persuasive in putting across their point of view and trying to convert others to their point of view. They also believe strongly that they have this God-given right for them to use their military might or whatever strength they have to force others to submit to their understanding. So it's a huge problem. And honestly, at the heart of the problem are many of these arguments, some of which I've mentioned. And I'm absolutely convinced that these arguments are not relevant anymore. They are incorrectly put across. The only way out is to engage them in a discussion. I sometimes say that they are going there to kill others for the sake of their religion. For God's sake, first save your own faith. What you are doing is going against your own text. Your text says that there can be no contradiction in the Quran. And what you are doing is actually announcing that the Quran is contradicting itself, God forbid. Because the Quran says you can't kill anybody. And what you're doing is that you are killing in the name of God and in the name of your religion. So, they need to be confronted. They need to be, well, to confront them is probably a strong word. They need to be engaged. They need to be talked to. They need to be politely invited to look at the other point of view. And that is, I think, something which all people who are concerned about this problem of extremism leading to terrorism must do. Did I miss anything?
I was just wondering if there was any sort of empirical aspect to that, so whether there's been any empirical research on that approach. I just think it might be an interesting research space, that's all.
Yeah, it would be interesting, but the question is more relevant to the lady sitting next to me. Have you done something? I'm sure that quite a few students whom you supervise.
We haven't done a huge amount on this particular topic.
Right.
And there are now specialist centres that focus on radicalisation, extremism, and so forth.
We do have research done on it in Pakistan, but if you would want, I can refer to some of them because in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, this phenomenon is there in a big way, and because we witness it every day. For us, it's a reality that obviously is something that we cannot ignore. But you're right that it needs to be put across in the form of some well-researched presentations and articles, and I hopefully would be able to pass on some of the stuff to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that will be great.
Lauren, I think and then Abdulazim, I think we'll need to close. Rory, go ahead.
Thanks again for speaking. Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned the quote, "When someone has killed someone, it's as if they've killed the whole of mankind." The full version of that includes a part where it says, "Unless they have killed someone else or have been spreading mischief in the land." And in light of yesterday's news about the public flogging of the two lesbian women in Malaysia for their acts, surely this quote can be interpreted by either authorities or extremists and used to maybe legitimize punishments or even killings of people for different acts. So what exactly constitutes spreading mischief in the land?
Yeah, as far as the first part is concerned, there were 3 dots which were ellipses, giving the understanding that I've deliberately missed some part of it because it was not directly relevant. Mischief on earth means, according to the understanding that emerges from some passages of the Quran, that because of the evil acts, inclinations of an individual or a group of them, the life, property, or honor of the citizens is in danger, is at stake. So if there are, let's say, serial killers, if there are robbers, if there are rapists, and they have, because of their evil deeds, are threatening the lives of others, they are threatening others of being deprived of their property or honor, then they are eligible to be punished. And there are a number of punishments suggested about them. The question of gays and lesbians is not something that has been directly addressed in the Quran. Some people claim that some of the companions talked about it, but we do not find any direct mention in Hadith as well. We do have a discussion and debate about it in amongst Muslim scholars. We do not approve of it. We would like to put across our view in a manner that others do at least understand what it is. If you ask me, I'll briefly say that if somebody is doing something behind the door, away from the public gaze, you cannot do anything about it. So individuals, if they are doing something privately, if I know somebody and I am attached to the individual, I'll talk to him or her and help the person understand that what he or she is doing from my point of view is wrong. However, this kind of activity, which we considered evil, should not come in public. Our difference of opinion with some of the people in the West is that this should not be allowed to be publicly legitimized. So that's a debate. Now, what exactly is the punishment is something which can always be debated, and there is no one clear view. So what I would urge is that what happens in the Muslim world should not be taken as the ultimate verdict of Islam. There are people who have their views, and some of them, when they get the opportunity of implementing their views, they do it the way they think is right. But I don't think that, if in the present times, when we have not as yet properly put across our view, and we have not come up with a clear legislation which is communicated to everybody, we should not go for such extreme punishments. We can legislate, we can communicate, and then we can let people know that, look here, if you are entering Malaysia or Pakistan, better not do anything in the public. And that hopefully is not going to be unfair, because we have a right to have our laws on the basis of our understanding. But what happened there, I don't know. I don't know the details, whether this couple was actually informed about the fact, and I'm not too sure how what they were doing came to the notice of the authorities.
I did notice the gentleman on my left had his hand up, so happy to continue the question to yourself if you wanted to ask. Okay, so I was going to build up on something Sheikh Haroon mentioned, which is around the issue of, democratization of knowledge, and you were saying that essentially what I'm picking up from your argument is a kind of marketplace of ideas notion that extremism is a product of a confined and narrow religious environment, and exposing that individual to a broader perspective would resolve the issue. And then Sheikh Haroon's kind of approach was questioning the idea of whether or not returning to tradition is necessary. So I just wanted to kind of build on that a bit more, because you responded by talking about kind of the individual responsibility to have a relationship with the text and to be able to read it and choose an opinion thereafter. And a lot of that, and there is quite a lot of kind of scholarship on this, kind of ties that particular approach to groups like ISIS, groups like Al-Qaeda, and a more virulent and kind of violent approach on the basis that the individualized model gives the individual authority to commit violence, whereas the tradition has maintained very strong forms of restricting violence both for the individual, both as well as communities. I just wanted if you could kind of clarify a bit more. Do you think it really is a case of going back to the individual authority?
When we talk about tradition and authority, one model is the model of Roman Catholics. You've got one authority, and then the authority decides, and everybody follows. We Muslims do claim that we don't believe in that kind of authority, because the ultimate authority in religion is nobody except the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him. Everybody else is a follower. Most certainly there are some people who are scholars, and therefore in a better position to understand what the text is saying, and therefore their views have to be taken seriously. However, when you say that if we were to follow the tradition of following the scholars, that's what raises certain questions. For example, why should I follow a certain set of scholars? In my country and in Afghanistan, what has happened is that there are so-called scholars who have formed their own groups, and they are inviting people to come and become a part of the military activity expedition that they go for in the name of jihad. Now you might say that those people are not genuine scholars, but who is going to decide as to whether a certain group of people who seemingly appear to be scholars, they are reciting the Quran in excellent accent of Arabic, they are quoting the Quran hadith, from their memory, etc. So what I mentioned was the question as to who is a scholar and whose opinion is correct ultimately has to be taken by the individual. I'm sure that the individual cannot do his own research, so he or she must know the limitations. However, the decision has to come from the individual. But I also believe that, if you have a proper, good Muslim state, the state should take the responsibility of ensuring that the different schools of thought, if they are there, they should be organized, and there should be a proper way of letting people know of what religion is. I think compared to Pakistan, Malaysia is a better example, where at least you have states which are functioning in a manner that they are kings or princes or whoever. They are the religious, authority. They decide through the consultation of scholars. That helps, and probably that is one of the reasons why the tendency towards extremism leading to terrorism in Malaysia is not quite as pronounced as it is in the subcontinent, where there are numerous groups and everybody claiming to have authority. But I think the solution, quite apart from the responsibility of the state, is in making people more and more aware, giving them more information, knowledge about Islam. When you are engaged in a dialogue, when you are engaged in a religious discussion, wherein no matter how strong your view is, you're listening to me, you cannot become violent, aggressive in the name of religion, because you know that even if my view is what I believe in and I'm strongly attached to, there are other perspectives as well. Before I think of killing an individual, I've got to be doubly sure that what I'm doing is the right thing to do. And when you engage yourself in a discussion, I'm absolutely sure that your confidence is going to be weakened, if not shattered, that killing is the right thing to do.
Maybe I'll ask a final question.
Brief.
Brief. I thought I had like two questions there. So I'll be like the devil's advocate, and in the first two slides, you were talking about enforcing a single opinion and being tolerant of other opinions. So the prophets themselves, we believe in the idea of itmamul hujjah, which is roughly translated establishment of proof, right? So they were, they were championing a single point of view, right? And when the proof was established, either you succeeded or you were destroyed. So the conclusion was that. So looking at that, were the prophets being tolerant? Number two, if the proof
Don't ask the number two question. I'll forget the first question. It's so loaded.
We'll keep it
Yeah.
the first one.
It's related. It's related in the sense that if they have established the proof, what is the point of people who come after to go and do any other investigation, because it has been established? Hence, the conclusion or whatever was done could just perpetuate itself for the rest of time.
You see, if it is not making matters more confusing, what I would want to suggest is that the message of Islam from the beginning was inclusive. It claimed that it was the truth, but it didn't condemn others as gone cases to be doomed. There was a short duration towards the last part of the prophetic mission and a bit later after his demise, when the message of Islam became exclusivist. It did not accommodate anybody else, any other view. Why? Because of the same reason, phenomenon that you've referred to, itmam-e-hujjat. The message became so unmistakably clear that there was no possibility of any reasonable, rational person to reject it. That's the key to understanding many of the concepts of the Quran. When that short duration ended, confusions, the possibility of not understanding properly, questions not getting answered convincingly, again started. And that is the scheme of the Almighty, to allow people to live in a life where the truth is not absolutely clear. The law of itmam-e-hujjat is itself clarifying that had everything been absolutely clear, then people would not have been allowed to survive. Because God would have said that, you know it, I'm telling you, you know it. And you are not just rejecting it, you are opposing it. So the idea of itmam-e-hujjat, you asked why was it there? Well, that's again a long discussion, but briefly, the Almighty wanted to show to the mankind that in their history, there have been instances wherein God's message became clear. Some nations rejected those messages, and they were taken to task in this very life. Therefore, be absolutely sure that there is going to be an accountability day. Some people met with their accountability in this very life, just as a sample, just to give others a reason to think and ponder. You see, when you talk about the possibility of life after death, it's more of a philosophical discussion. Nobody has seen anybody coming back. Some people do try to say that some people met with the phenomenon of clinical death and then they re-emerged, but obviously that's not very clear. So, in order for the understanding of life after death to become more clear and convincing, the Almighty arranged in the history of humankind certain eras when He sent His messengers who communicated His message so clearly that those who rejected those messages did not need to go through any process of accountability, examination, and investigation. Their rejection beyond a certain deadline was considered to be enough for them to be punished here, and this was an announcement on the part of the Almighty for the rest of the mankind that likewise accountability process is going to take place in the next life.
Good. Thank you so much, Khalid, for talking to us and
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Much food for thought. And on the